I wasn't in a good place that spring, and that sentence still feels cleaner than the truth of it. I was 46, on unpaid leave from the diesel shop in Monroe after 2 months of showing up late, forgetting torque specs I could have recited in my sleep, and standing in front of open-engine bays like the parts had started speaking a language I never learned. The foreman didn't fire me. He did something worse and kinder. He put both hands on the workbench, looked at me for a long time and said, "Ray, go handle your life. Bay 3 will still be here if you come back right." I drove home that afternoon with my lunch pail untouched, and my jaw clenched so hard it ached behind my ears. Eli was waiting by the apartment window, his chair angled so he could see the parking lot, and when I came through the door, he gave me that careful smile kids get when they've learned to measure a room before they speak. The practical reason we moved up to my dad's old homestead in the Cascades fit on paper. No rent, a paid-off parcel with a tired house, a busted pump shed, and enough timber around it to keep neighbours politely distant. The private reason didn't fit anywhere. I needed a place where I could fail quietly while I learned how to be a father again to a boy who had survived the same logging road crash that took his mother. Eli was 12 and already better at pain management than most grown men I knew. He kept a folded blanket on his lap for rough ground, carried tire patch kits in his chair pouch, and never complained when a doorway was too narrow or a threshold too high. I was the one who complained, usually under my breath, usually at wood grain and door hinges and gravel, as if hardware had betrayed me on purpose. The first week on the property, I attacked the place like effort could erase history. I levelled the back step, widened the bathroom door, and built a plywood ramp from the kitchen mudroom down to the yard. I set the pitch wrong twice, then fixed it, then added cleats, because Cascades rain turns smooth wood into a lie. I built another short ramp for the front porch and skinned my knuckles on rusted screws my father had sunk sometime in the 90s. I did not sit with Eli long enough to ask what he needed before I started building what I thought he should have. That was the pattern. Solve first, listen later. By the second week of April, I had mapped the property in terms of obstacles. Washout by the old chicken run, stump line by the shed, soft shoulder near the alder stand, and Black Alder Creek cutting the lower meadow in two like a sentence that ended too soon. That creek used to be where we picnicked when I was a kid. My mum packed fried chicken in wax paper, my dad pretended he liked potato salad, and I caught exactly 0 fish while making the kind of noise fish avoid. The old path down there had been rough even then, but there was one flat stretch near the bend where you could set a blanket and hear waterwork over stone without raising your voice to be heard. Eli had seen the spot in an old photo album we found in a damp cabinet box. Me at 8 with a bowl cut and a trout that had clearly been handed to me by an adult. He tapped that picture and said, "Could we go there once it warms up?" I said yes too quickly, the kind of yes that comes from fear, not confidence. The next morning I walked the trail, stood where it narrowed at runoff season, and looked down at 20 feet of fast, cold creek, braiding over slick rock. Not deep enough to look dramatic, deep enough to stop a wheelchair cold. Eli and I settled into a routine that looked decent from outside. Oatmeal and eggs by 6:30, meds at 7, schoolwork at the kitchen table while I fought the Homestead one repair at a time. I ran conduit, replaced 2 rotten joists, and rehung the pantry door. I made lists on blue painter's tape and stuck them to the fridge. Call insurer, order gravel, ask county about culvert permits, check left caster bearings, find old photos for Eli's history project. Every evening we tried for a short roll down the trail until the ground argued back. Sometimes we made it to the cedar snag and turned around because the ruts got too deep. Sometimes we reached the creek bank and sat there, both of us staring at the same moving water, both pretending we hadn't hoped for more. One of those evenings he angled his chair beside me and nudged my boot with his front caster. "Dad, you're doing the jaw thing again." "The what?" "The clamp-down jaw thing. Means your brain is yelling." I breathed out through my nose and watched current feather around a branch. "I can build us a better route. Might need geotextile and some fill. Maybe a small bridge if permits don't take forever." He nodded like he was checking off boxes. "Okay, but I didn't ask for a contractor speech. I asked if your brain is yelling." I laughed once, short and dry. "Yeah, it is." "About Mom?" "About all of it." He looked back at the water, then at me. "Mine yells too, just not as loud when we're outside." We stayed there another 10 minutes without talking. Boone, our cattle dog mutt, with one torn ear and endless opinions, paced the bank and kept returning to Eli's left wheel to press against it, as if he was anchoring the whole operation with 45 pounds of stubborn loyalty. My father's place had its own kind of silence after dark. Not empty silence. Working silence. Roof ticking as temperature dropped. Furs rubbing in light wind. Pump kicking once at midnight, if nobody forgot to prime it right. I slept on a narrow bed in the room where I'd kept model trucks and baseball cards, and more than once, I woke convinced I heard my wife, Mara, in the hallway saying my name the way she did when she needed me to move a couch or open a jar. Grief is less a sharp pain than a system failure. Circuits that used to run clean start throwing false signals. Morning came anyway. Coffee, meds, straps checked, tires inflated, lists made. I kept moving because stillness felt like being cornered. On Thursdays, my sister June drove up with groceries and practical judgment. She worked at the feed store in town and had a way of looking at my projects like she was calculating both their usefulness and their emotional cost. She carried in milk, cereal, and a sack of apples, then stood in the mudroom inspecting my latest ramp extension. "You overbuilt this by about 2 wars," she said. "It won't fail." "I know it won't. That's not what I'm saying." Eli rolled in from the hall and grinned. "Aunt June says Dad builds like he's mad at gravity." June snorted. "She's not wrong, and yes, I refer to myself in third person. Put that in your school notes." I leaned against the counter. "You got any spare county inspectors in your pocket? Creek crossing's still a no-go." She softened then, voice lower. "Ray, you don't have to win every day for him to know you're trying." That sounds like a mug quote. Fine. Here's the non-mug version. He watches how you talk to yourself. Be careful what he learns. After she left, her words sat with me longer than I wanted. I had spent months treating competence like a moral test. If I could keep machines running, if I could keep a roof dry, if I could solve enough physical problems, then maybe I could avoid the one question that waited under all of it. Why I had been driving that day, why I took that road, why a family can leave for groceries and come back rearranged. The crash report lived in a folder I kept zipped in my tool chest, as if proximity to wrenches made it manageable. Wet gravel, load shift from an oncoming truck, shoulder collapse, rotation, impact, no criminal negligence, no defective parts, just weather, weight, timing, and one bend in the road. People said that was supposed to comfort me. It didn't. Randomness is a hard god to live with. It leaves no one to argue with. By late April, Eli had figured out the house better than I had. He knew exactly how much speed he needed for the hallway rug lip, which floorboards clicked before dawn, where Boone liked to sleep so he wouldn't clip a paw in the dark. One night, after I stalled out trying to describe a plan for the creek for the 3rd time that week, he set his pencil down and looked straight at me. "You can tell me if we never get to that picnic place," he said. "I can handle it." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" I opened my mouth and got nothing useful. The kitchen light buzzed faintly above us. Outside, rain tapped the eaves in patient little strikes. Finally, I said, "The point is, I'm tired of watching you stop at edges." He held my eyes for a long second, then nodded once. "I stop at edges because I'm not dumb, not because I'm broken." The precision of that hit me harder than any accusation could have. I sat down across from him and pressed my palms flat against the table to keep from fidgeting. "You're right," I said. "That was me talking from my own stuff." He shrugged, not dismissive, just honest. We both got stuff. That became our language. Not every conversation needed unpacking at full depth. Sometimes we just named the weather inside us and kept going. On clear afternoons, we worked in the shop together, him handing me sockets in exact order while I rebuilt an old mower carb just to hear something respond to care. He liked the feel of organized tools, the click of ratchets, the way a frozen bolt eventually gave if you were patient and used leverage instead of rage. Boone supervised from the doorway like a foreman with no deadlines. I told myself the move was temporary until insurance settled and I got my head straight. Yet each day another small decision tied us to that ground. A grab bar screwed in where Eli could actually use it. A shelf lowered, a rut filled, a narrow doorway widened by 1.5 inches that changed everything. I started learning what access meant beyond ramps and rails. It meant asking before doing. It meant accepting slower routes. It meant understanding that dignity lives in details most people step over without seeing. The creek stayed there, fast and indifferent, flashing between alder trunks at the bottom of the meadow, like a challenge I couldn't stop reading. Some mornings I stood on the bank before Eli woke and studied the current, tracing lines where rocks might hold, where fill might wash out, where a crossing might be built if a man had enough money, enough permits, enough luck. I wasn't looking for miracles. I didn't believe in them. I believed in measurements, in load paths, in the practical mercy of things that can be tested twice. Still, by the time May opened with cold mist in the low ground and snow lingering on the higher ridges, I had begun to understand the real work in front of me had less to do with conquering land and more to do with becoming a father my son didn't have to manage. The homestead gave me room to practice that, and room to fail at it, without an audience. Each evening, when we rolled as far as we could and stopped where the bank dropped to moving water, Eli would rest his hands lightly on his rims, and Boone would sit between us, ears up, patient as a fence post. We would watch the creek run past the place we couldn't reach yet, and for a few quiet minutes the distance between us felt measurable, which was more mercy than I had expected that year. Eli finally rubbed his hands together and said, "I'm getting creek-level cold, Dad." And that was our signal to head back uphill. I put my hand on his push bar, Boone trotting ahead, and we took the long route around the stump line because the shorter one still tilted too hard on the right side. Halfway to the house, Eli looked over his shoulder at me. "You okay?" "Yeah." "That sounded like you're fake, yeah." I adjusted my grip and kept us steady through a muddy patch. "I'm frustrated, not at you." "I know." He let that be enough, and I was grateful for it in the way a tired man is grateful for a door that opens without sticking. Inside, we did our evening choreography. Wet shoes by the rack, chair tires wiped so the kitchen floor didn't turn into a skid test, meds with applesauce, homework check, dog-fed first, because Boone had never accepted being second in any household process. Eli worked on math at the table, while I browned ground turkey for tacos, and tried not to overseason from distraction. We ate with the radio low, static and old country fading in and out through mountain weather. After dishes, I helped him transfer, set his charger and water within reach, and stood in his doorway longer than necessary. He noticed, of course. "You can sleep too, you know." "Planning to." "You're doing the stare thing." I nodded once. "Night, bud." "Night, Dad." The house settled around us, wood and pipe and wind, all the little sounds of a place old enough to have opinions. I lay down, fully dressed on top of the quilt, and stared at the ceiling where a water stain looked like Oregon if you squinted. My body felt used up, but my head kept running laps. Every route to that creek bent toward the same end. Too steep, too soft, too narrow, too expensive, too late. I could calculate bridge load and wheel clearance in my sleep. None of that touched the part that hurt. At some point, I gave up pretending I was resting. I pulled on a jacket, stepped into boots without lacing them all the way, and eased the back door shut so it wouldn't click. Boone lifted his head from his mat, gave me one look that said he was coming no matter what my plans were, and padded after me. The night was cold enough to sharpen edges. Clouds had thinned, leaving a clean half-moon over the fir ridge and a skin of silver on the meadow grass. Down by Black Alder Creek, the water moved dark and quick. Not loud, just steady, like a machine running right below hearing range. I stood at the bank with my hands in my pockets and let the cold bite through my jacket until my chest unclenched a little. I had spent a year speaking in practical sentences because practical sentences don't wobble. We need groceries. We need traction strips. We need to leave by 7:30. Underneath that, the truth had been waiting with crossed arms. I was afraid of failing him in all the quiet ways no one applauds. Afraid of becoming a man my son had to comfort when it was my job to be ballast. Afraid that every hard edge in the world would reach him before I could. I remember standing there and thinking in a raw, present tense I usually avoided. I am tired of performing competence like it can buy me absolution. I am tired of hearing Mara's laugh in memory and then going blank on the exact colour of the shirt she wore that last morning. I am tired of answering a 12-year-old's kindness with engineering drawings. I wanted one thing I could do that was both useful and tender, and the creek kept saying no in moving water. Boone sat down beside me, pressed his shoulder against my shin, and sighed like an old man at the end of a shift. I scratched behind his torn ear and said, "You're carrying a lot for a guy who eats pine cones on purpose." He huffed once through his nose, unimpressed with my joke, and stared at the current like he was auditing it. We stayed there until my fingers went numb. When I finally turned back toward the house, I looked over my shoulder at the crossing gap one more time, as if staring hard could reveal a line I'd missed. It was just creek and rock and shadow, honest and indifferent. Morning came grey and damp. Eli slept a little late, so I made coffee and rolled the mower battery onto the porch to put it on charge. Boone paced the yard, then stopped at the edge of the trail, ears up toward the lower alder stand. Not stiff, not alarmed, just attentive in that focused way he used when deer passed through. I watched him for a minute, then went back inside to start oatmeal. After breakfast, Eli asked if we could go down before schoolwork. Just to see water level. I said yes, and we took it slow through wet grass, his wheels leaving paired tracks dark as handwriting behind us. The creek was up 1/2 inch from the night before, maybe more in the middle run. I crouched to check bank erosion, talking through options mostly for my own benefit. If I sink a couple treated posts above floodline, maybe I can float a narrow footbridge section and pin it seasonally. Eli looked at the current, then at me. Is this a real plan or a dad spiral plan? Little of both. He nodded like a foreman approving honest labour. Boone moved ahead to the edge, then sat abruptly, facing the trees across the water. His tail gave 2 easy thumps and went still. That was when I noticed the quiet. It took me a second because quiet in the mountains is never empty. There are always layers: thrush, jay, squirrel chatter, wing flick in brush, branch click. But that morning the bird song had dropped out all at once, not in panic, more like a room lowering its voice when someone enters. Wind still moved, water still ran, everything else held. "Dad," Eli said softly, "why is it so hush?" "I hear it too." We both listened. Boone stayed seated, head high, not a hair raised on his back. I scanned the far tree line and saw nothing but alder trunks and cedar shadow. Then Eli pointed down near his left wheel. "What's that?" At first I thought runoff had sorted debris into a line. Then I stepped closer and saw flat river stones laid in a tidy row just above the mud lip, where his front casters usually bogged. 6 stones, maybe 7 inches across each, pressed down and levelled. Not random placement. They sat like the first marks of a measured path. I knelt and set my palm on one. Cold, wet, stable. I pushed. It didn't rock. "Did you do that yesterday?" Eli asked. "No." "June. She hasn't been up since Thursday." I stood and looked upstream for signs of wash pattern. The creek had dropped small cobble on the inner bend, sure, but these were selected flats carried against current logic and placed where wheel load would matter. I knew enough about water movement to trust when it wasn't the author. Boone finally got up, walked to Eli's side and nudged the left tire once with his nose before looking back at the tree line. Calm as Sunday. We didn't stay long. School still had to happen, and the temperature was dropping with a thin mist coming off the water. On the way back, Eli said, "Could be someone helping. Could be. Could be weird kids with too much time. Could be. Could be you sleepwalking and doing accessibility landscaping in the dark." I barked out a laugh before I could stop it. If I start sleep engineering, remind me to invoice myself. By the second dawn that week, I went down alone before Eli woke. The mist sat low over the meadow, and my boots soaked through at the toes by the time I reached the bank. Boone moved ahead of me and took the same position as yesterday, seated, watching the far trees with what looked almost like patience. The birds were quiet again, not absent, just waiting. I crouched at the mud edge and counted. 9 stones now. 3 new ones, each wider than my hand, each sunk and shimmed with pea gravel, so the tops sat near level. The spacing had shifted too, opening just enough to account for front caster width and rear wheel push rhythm. I knew that geometry, because I should have known it sooner. Seeing it reflected back at me, set into wet earth by someone else's effort, brought a complicated mix of gratitude and shame I didn't have neat language for. Then I saw the fireweed. A small spray of stems lay on the bank beside the twin tracks from Eli's chair, purple blossoms beaded with mist, cut clean near the base. Fireweed didn't bloom thick here this early, and certainly not right on this bank. Somebody had gathered it from higher, carried it down, and set it precisely where his wheel stopped yesterday. I looked around slowly, every muscle expecting to find boot prints or tire marks. Nothing but deer slots, my own tread, Boone's paws, and the long drag line where runoff had shifted bark. On the far side, alder roots gripped dark soil, between trunks, shadow, and light. I whispered, mostly to keep my own breathing even. "Okay, I see this." Boone turned his head toward me, then back to the trees, tail tapping once against damp grass. 3 days passed before I said any of it out loud in full. Until then, I carried it like a fragile tool, careful not to bang it against skepticism too hard. I told myself there had to be a straightforward explanation. Neighbor boys, an early fisherman with a generous streak, some old-timer with more strength than vanity. Each version worked for about 10 seconds and then fell apart on details. Kids didn't level stones for caster approach. Fishermen didn't leave fresh fireweed beside wheel tracks they hadn't seen made. Old-timers might help, sure, but they usually left boot prints and a story. On the third dawn, Eli came with me again. The mist lifted as we reached the bank, and the morning opened in thin gold stripes through alder leaves. Boone went straight to his lookout point and sat, tail sweeping once, then still. Birdsong paused. Not gone. Paused. Eli looked down and let out a quiet, amazed breath. 2 more stones had appeared overnight, completing a gentle arc into the current before angling toward the far side. Not enough to cross yet. Enough to suggest intention. Beside the first stone, tucked against a root where water wouldn't take it, lay another small spray of fireweed. Eli rested his hands on his rims and stared at the line a long moment. "Dad," he said, voice steady but thin around the edges. Someone noticed. I swallowed, looking from the stones to the flowers to the calm dog keeping watch like this had become his morning job. "Yeah," I said. "Someone did." Eli kept looking at the stones like he was reading a sentence in a language he almost knew. I crouched beside the bank, pressed my thumb into the mud between 2 flats, and felt how firmly they'd been seated. Whoever had done it had not dropped them and hoped. They had tested each one, then shimmed where it wobbled. "We're not trying it yet," I said. "I know." He didn't sound disappointed so much as careful. "Can we just sit a minute?" We sat. Boone held his post facing the far trees, chest up, ears easy. After about a minute, the birds resumed in scattered pieces. First a chickadee call, then a thrush farther uphill, then the ordinary chatter of a morning that had paused and moved on. On the walk back, my head stayed down in practical channels because practical channels felt safer than ore. Slope angle, stone thickness, load transfer under wet tread. I found myself counting Eli's push rhythm in sets of 3, matching where those gaps would land. And a hard truth slid in sideways. The spacing on that bank fit him better than my last sketch had. At the mudroom sink, while Eli washed creek grit off his hands, he said, "Are we going to tell Aunt June?" "Not yet." "Because she won't believe us?" "Because I don't know what I'd be asking her to believe." He nodded once. "Fair." By mid-morning, I was in the shop pretending to sort hardware while my attention kept walking itself back to Black Alder Creek. Grief had been the loudest thing in me for so long that I forgot curiosity could still take up space. That day it did. It edged in through details and demanded a fair look. I grabbed a notebook, a tape measure, and a handful of thin cedar stakes. Eli rolled up beside the bench with that expression he wore when he knew I was about to over-engineer something. "You doing science now?" he asked. "I'm doing evidence." He pointed at the tape measure. "Looks suspiciously like science." "Don't spread rumors," he grinned. Too late. By the time the clouds lifted after lunch, we were back at the bank. I set 2 stakes above the high water mark and ran mason's string between them so I could reference line and spacing. I measured each exposed stone width and the gap to the next, called numbers aloud, and Eli wrote them down in the notebook balanced on his knees. "Stone 3 to 4, center to center, 19 inches, I said. "Got it." "Stone 4 to 5, 21. He looked up. "That's almost exactly my comfortable push if I'm not climbing." I swallowed and stared at the page. "Yeah, it is." I tamped fresh mud smooth around the outer edge of the first 3 stones with a scrap board, clean enough to catch prints if anyone came in from our side. On the way out, I dragged a dead branch lightly along the near bank approach to mark the surface. Not a trap, just a baseline. That evening, I cooked chili while Eli did reading homework, and Boone snored under the table hard enough to vibrate his water bowl. I caught myself looking at the back door every few minutes like I expected someone to knock and explain the whole thing in plain terms. Nobody did. After dishes, Eli said, "You think it could still be runoff?" "I think runoff doesn't pick matching flats and then account for caster width." "So, person, maybe. You don't sound convinced." I leaned against the counter and rubbed my eyes. "A person means tracks, tool marks, some sign of approach. We're getting almost none." Eli turned his pencil in his fingers. "Could be someone really good at moving in the woods." "Could be." He gave me a long look, same steady look his mother used when she wanted me to finish a thought. "Dad, if this is helping and it's not hurting, maybe we don't have to solve all of it tonight." I breathed out and nodded. That might be the wisest thing said in this kitchen all year. By me specifically? By anyone specifically. The next dawn came colder, with low fog pooled in the meadow. I went down alone while Eli slept, Boone ghosting ahead through wet grass. My branch mark on the approach was untouched. The mud panel I'd smoothed held only my boot pattern from yesterday, and Boone's prints layered over it. No fresh human tread. I knelt at the first stake and looked up. 2 new stones had appeared overnight. They were not small additions. Both were broad, dense slabs, set deeper than the first row, and each had pea gravel wedged under one edge where the bank sloped. I touched the gravel and rolled a piece between thumb and forefinger. It came from upstream bars, not this muddy lip. I wrote measurements with numb fingers. Stone 5 to 6, 20 inches. 6 to 7, 19.5. The arc was now unmistakable, curving to meet a calmer seam in the current where water split around a submerged shelf. Whoever placed them understood flow as well as load. Maybe better than I did. I stood there a long time with Boone pressed against my leg, and I let the present tense arrive because it would not be denied. I told myself this couldn't be real, that grief had turned my judgment soft, and I was assigning intention where there was only chance. But the stones sat under my hand, with a stubborn, physical certainty that would have passed any shop test. I wanted to reduce it to prank or coincidence because those belonged to a manageable world. I wanted one explanation that would let me file this undersolved and move on to shingles and invoices. Yet the pattern kept widening beyond my categories. I was a man who trusted torque values and straight edges. I was also a father watching a crossing appear one deliberate piece at a time in the exact dimensions my son needed. Both things were true. Neither cancelled the other. By Friday evening, curiosity had done what grief hadn't managed in months. It got me moving with my head up. I took Eli down just before supper to show him the 2 new stones. He studied the line, then looked at the smoothed mud panel and the undisturbed branch mark. "So, if it's a person, they're coming from the far side," he said. "Looks that way." He tipped his chin toward the opposite bank. "Can we leave a note?" I pictured a paper note turning to pulp in creek mist and shook my head. Maybe not paper. "Rock note, then." He pointed to a dry patch near the first stake. "Like stacked ones." We found 3 fist-sized stones and set them in a small cairn at the edge of the grass. Nothing elaborate, just visible. Eli placed the top one and sat back. "What does it say?" I asked. He thought for a second. "It says we noticed too." On the way home, I detoured to the woodshed for kindling while Eli rolled ahead with Boone. The shed sat halfway down the slope with a narrow view to the creek through young firs. I had one arm full of split cedar and my head full of ordinary dinner timing when Boone, 10 yards uphill, stopped and looked back at me. Not alarmed, waiting. Then the birds cut out again. The quiet settled in layers, and through the trees I caught movement on the far bank. At first my brain did what brains do under strain. Bear, stump, shadow, trick of light. Then it moved again into open gap between 2 alder trunks, and scale corrected all my guesses at once. It was enormous. 8 feet at least, maybe more, broad through shoulders and chest, covered in dark brown-black hair that held the dusklight in matte bands. It stood in profile above the waterline with a boulder cradled in both hands, not hugged to its body but carried out and low the way you carry something heavy and breakable. Every motion was controlled. It stepped once into the shallows, placed one foot, tested purchase, then lowered the stone toward the existing arc with slow, exact pressure. I did not feel hunted. I felt witnessed. It set the boulder into the current seam, paused with both palms on top, shifted weight minutely, then leaned back and watched how water wrapped around the edge. A tiny correction followed, a push no bigger than an inch. The stone settled and held. It remained there another heartbeat, verifying line, then straightened without hurry. Some deeply awkward reflex took the wheel in my mouth, and I whispered, "Sorry," to a being the size of a shed that had just done better site work than half the contractors I'd known. The absurdity hit me half a second later, and I let out one short, shaky laugh into my sleeve. The figure turned its head toward me. Not a snap, a measured acknowledgement. Through branches and dusk I could make out the face enough to know what it wasn't. No bared teeth, no charge posture, no dominance display. The eyes caught amber in the low light, steady and unreadable in the way old trees are unreadable. It held my gaze for maybe 3 seconds, then lowered its chin a fraction, stepped backward out of the open strip, and moved into fir shadow with astonishing quiet for something that large. Water kept talking over stone. Boone's tail thumped twice against wet grass uphill. I stayed exactly where I was until my forearm started cramping around the cedar splits. When I finally moved, I set the wood down, walked to the bank edge for a clearer look, and saw the newly placed boulder locked in line with the others, water feathering around it clean and even. No roar, no drama, just work completed. At supper, I overcooked the cornbread because I forgot to set a timer. Eli took one bite, looked at my face, and put his fork down. "You saw something," he said. I sat across from him and tried to choose words that were plain and true. "I saw who's been placing the stones." His eyes widened, then settled. "Who?" I shook my head once. "I don't have a normal answer." He waited. I gave him the whole account, every detail I could trust. Where I stood, how it moved, how it set the boulder, how it backed away instead of coming closer. I did not add drama. I did not trim my own foolish sorry. When I got to that part, Eli actually smiled. "You apologized?" To the forest, apparently. He laughed, then grew serious. "Were you scared?" I thought about it honestly. Startled, yes. Scared, no. That's the part that keeps catching me. It could have made itself terrifying if it wanted. It didn't. Eli looked toward the dark window where the yard lights reflected our kitchen back at us. If it wanted to scare us, it already would have. I felt that land in me with the weight of a tool returning to its proper drawer. "I know," I said quietly, "and that's the part I can't explain." We cleaned up in a steady silence that wasn't heavy. Later, after meds and charger and Boone circling 3 times before dropping by Eli's bed, I stepped out onto the porch with a blanket around my shoulders. The creek was out of sight from there, but not out of earshot, the water carrying its low, continuous rush through the trees. For the first time in a long while, my mind did not run the crash report in loops when the house went quiet. It held one image instead. Huge hands lowering a stone with the care of someone setting down a sleeping child's toy, then stepping back to give us room. I stayed on that porch until the blanket stopped feeling warm, listening to water move through dark trees and trying to fit what I had seen into a life built on bolts bearings, and things you could point at twice. The back door eased open behind me, and Eli rolled out with his hoodie half-zipped, and Boone pushing his nose past the wheel like he owned night patrol. "You're supposed to be asleep," I said. "You're supposed to be asleep too." He parked next to me and looked out toward the meadow. "You still thinking about it?" "Yeah." He was quiet for a few beats, then said, "You don't have to make it smaller so I can handle it." That landed clean. I nodded once and tucked the blanket tighter around his knees. "I'm not trying to make it smaller. I'm trying to keep it accurate." Eli gave me that little side smile that looked too much like Mara's to be easy. Accurate is good. Also, if a giant forest guy is doing creek construction, accurate might include weird. I laughed into my sleeve, low so it wouldn't wake the whole ridge. "That is fair." We sat there with Boone between us, 3 silhouettes and a mutt under porch light, the house warm at our backs and the creek carrying on like it had no idea it had become the center of our lives. After a while, Eli said, "What do we do tomorrow?" "We go down in daylight. We don't crowd anything. We pay attention." He nodded. "That sounds like us, kind of." By Saturday morning, the mist was thin and bright, and the meadow looked scrubbed clean by night rain. We took the lower trail slow, Eli handling his wheels through the fir roots while I walked a step behind with one hand near the push bar, not on it. Boone ranged ahead, then doubled back, then settled into a steady trot as we neared the bank. The quiet found us again about 30 yards out. Birds didn't vanish. They just dialed down. Boone sat on his own at the usual spot, chest forward, tail brushing grass in patient sweeps. I felt that old reflex rise up, the one that wanted to classify and dismiss. Bear sign. Neighbor prank? Light angle. Anything ordinary. I told myself, this couldn't be real in the same stubborn tone I had used on seized bolts and stripped threads, but denial had less room to stand now. We rounded the last alder and saw the arc extended by one massive stone, exactly where last night's boulder should have carried line into the flow. Eli breathed out softly. "It worked." "Yeah," I said. "It worked." I was checking alignment against yesterday's mental map when movement across the creek caught my eye. Half shadow under the firs, broad shoulder, then full outline as it stepped into a pale strip of morning light. Bigger than any first impression stays for long, because scale only settles when you see it, beside things you know. Cedar trunks, bank height, water depth. It carried another flat rock in both hands and moved with a kind of deliberate patience that kept undoing my fear before fear could build. Eli saw it too. His hands tightened on his rims, then relaxed. "Dad, I see him." The creature paused when it noticed us. Not frozen, just attentive. 1 foot in the water, one on the stone seam, head slightly angled our way. Boone stayed seated. 10 yards downstream, a doe and a yearling stepped out, lowered their heads, and drank like nothing in the world had gone wrong. That was the detail that changed the temperature in my chest. Prey animals do not read press releases. They read truth faster than people do. I leaned down toward Eli without taking my eyes off the far bank. "We're going to back up a little. Give him room." Okay. We rolled uphill 5 yards to a dry patch where Eli could hold position without sliding. The creature watched us move, then resumed the work. It bent at the knees, lowered the stone into the seam, and tested it with pressure from both palms. Water split around the edge and braided downstream clean. A small adjustment followed, then stillness to verify load. The whole sequence had the same care I'd seen mechanics use when torquing heads on an old block that mattered. I realized my cap was in my hands and I had taken it off without thinking, same as if an elder had walked into a room. Eli noticed and whispered, "You just did church manners at a creek." "I did," I whispered back. "Apparently that's where we are." He made a brief sound that was half laugh, half disbelief, then went quiet again. The creature straightened and looked at us for a long second. There was no threat in it, no demand either, just a clear acknowledgement that we were sharing one piece of ground with care. Then he stepped backward toward Tree Shadow and waited there, visible but unintrusive, as if he was giving us first rights to decide how close this morning should be. I had spent a year bracing for force. Hospital calls, insurance letters, steep grades, hard weather, men in offices saying no with professional sympathy. Watching that huge figure hold distance on purpose did something none of those fights could do. It suggested that strength and gentleness were not opposites. They were a choice made moment by moment. We stayed until the chill reached through my jacket. On the way up, Eli looked over his shoulder at the creek 3 separate times. "He's not hiding from us," he said. "No. And he's not trying to come up here either." "No." He rolled another few feet, then added, "Feels like he's saying, 'I'll be over there, you be over here, and we can still help each other.'" I nodded. That's exactly what it feels like. By Sunday afternoon, a soft rain had moved in, the kind that turns every board slick and every plan into mud management. We had spent the morning on schoolwork and laundry, then went down after lunch to check how the new stones were handling runoff. The creek was higher, faster, and carrying bits of bark in quick loops. I hated taking Eli close when water rose, so we stayed on the near approach where the bank flattened. The problem showed up fast. The first 2 stones held fine, but the lip from trail dirt to stone top had softened and slumped, leaving a narrow notch. Eli tried a careful approach, and his left front caster dropped into it with a dull thump. No tip, no danger, just a hard stop that jolted his shoulders. "I'm okay," he said immediately, already backing out. I swallowed my own frustration and crouched by the notch. "You did it right." Ground gave way. He watched me inspect it and said, very even, "You're doing the jaw thing." "Yeah, working on it." I cut a small branch and tamped mud into the notch to make a temporary ramp. It held for 1 pass and then collapsed under the second. Rain kept beading on Eli's sleeves and running off Boone's coat. We could have pushed harder, made it a test of stubbornness, but I had promised myself not to turn his mobility into my proving ground. "Let's call it for now," I said. "Too soft." He nodded right away, which somehow made me feel worse and better at the same time. We turned uphill and reached the cedar snag where the trail widened. Eli set his brakes and looked back at the water. "Dad, can we wait here a minute?" "For what?" He shrugged. "I don't know, just a minute." We waited in light rain, Boone standing between us with droplets hanging from his whiskers. 2 minutes passed, maybe 3. Then Boone's ears lifted toward the far bank. I followed his line and saw the creature step out from fir cover again, moving toward the seam with 2 lengths of driftwood tucked under one arm and a flat stone in the other hand. Eli whispered, "He saw the snag point." My throat tightened. Looks like. From our higher perch we had a clear side view. The creature set the driftwood first, angling each piece into the bank like braces, then pressed the broad stone into the notch area where Eli's caster had caught. He leaned his weight slowly until it seated, added gravel with cupped hands from a shallow bar, and smoothed the transition with the heel of his palm in long, careful passes. Not random improvement, not general trail work. He repaired the exact failure point Eli had hit 3 minutes earlier. I felt the internal argument give out then. No more clever alternatives, no more convenient misreadings. This was deliberate kindness aimed with precision. Eli was crying quietly beside me, not loud, just tears tracking through rain on his cheeks. He scrubbed his sleeve across his face and laughed once at himself. "Rain cover," he said. "Same here," I managed, though I was standing under a cedar and not getting rained on at all. The creature finished, stepped back, and looked uphill toward us. 30 yards, maybe a little more. Plenty of distance for comfort, close enough for recognition. One hand rested on a cedar trunk. The posture held no urgency, no show. He simply stayed there, present and steady, until Eli lifted one hand from his wheel and gave a small wave. The creature lowered his head a fraction, almost like a nod, then turned and moved into timber with that same astonishing quiet. We waited another minute to let the moment settle, then rolled back down to the bank. The new lip was solid. I put my boot on it and bounced my weight. No shift. Eli lined up, pushed, and both front casters climbed clean onto the first stone without a hitch. He looked back at me, eyes wide. "Again," he said. He backed down and did it again. Smooth. A third time, same result. Boone trotted a small loop and sat with obvious satisfaction, as if he had been project manager all along. I took out the old flip phone I used as a spare camera and photographed the repair from 3 angles, including my tape measure laid across the new stone. I'd started that evidence habit to protect my own sanity, but now the photos felt less like proof for strangers and more like record of a gift I didn't want memory to blur. Back at the house, I printed 2 copies on the stubborn little inkjet, labelled the date and weather, and put one set in the tool chest folder with the creek measurements. The other set I handed to Eli. "For your drawer," I said. He traced the edge of the top photo with his thumb. "You think people would believe this?" "Some won't." He tucked the stack into his lap tray. "I don't need everybody to." That evening, June called to confirm Thursday groceries, and I almost told her everything right then. The words got as far as my teeth and stopped. Not from shame, more from protectiveness. This felt like a trust we were still learning how to carry. "How are my mountain men?" she asked. Eli grabbed the phone first. "We're good. Dad burned cornbread yesterday and blamed weather patterns." "That tracks," she said. "You two need anything specific?" I took the phone when he held it out. "Milk, apples, and dog food. Boone thinks he's underfed." From the floor, Boone thumped his tail once in support of this slander. June laughed. "Boone has never missed a meal in his life. You sound better, Ray." I looked through the window toward the dark meadow where the creek moved beyond sight. "Yeah," I said, and meant it in a way I hadn't in a long time. "I do." After dinner, Eli disappeared into the shop nook for half an hour and came back with cedar shavings in his hair and a small object wrapped in a shop rag. He unrolled it on the table. It was a rough little truck, hand-carved from scrap cedar, wheels hinted at with shallow cuts, grill lines crooked and proud. "For later," he said. I touched the tiny hood with one fingertip. "For what later?" He looked toward the back door and then at me. "For thank you, not yet, just when it's right." I nodded and wrapped it back up, setting it on the shelf above the mudroom bench, where we kept things we did not want to lose. Outside, water moved over stone in a steadier tone than before, and for the first time since we'd come to this place, the sound from Black Alder Creek did not read like a barrier. It sounded like work being carried forward, one careful piece at a time. That night the creek kept speaking through the trees, lower now, steadier, like it had found a better channel and meant to hold it. Eli wheeled to the mudroom shelf, touched the wrapped cedar truck once, and left it there. He didn't say anything else about timing. He just did his meds, checked Boone's water, and looked at me in the hallway. "You okay for real?" he asked. "I think so," I said. "Tired, but not the bad kind." He nodded. "Same." I got him settled, killed the kitchen light, and stood at the sink looking out at the dark yard where porch glow faded into alder shadow. I could still see, in my mind, those huge hands smoothing that castor lip with the heel of a palm. I had spent months convincing myself kindness had to come with paperwork, names, and reasons I could verify. This had come with none of that. Just attention. Just care. Rain started after midnight, light at first, then hard enough to drum on the metal patch over the old woodshed lean-to. By 3, it was a full spring downpour, cold and relentless, and every heavy burst drove my mind straight to the crossing. Stone holds. Mud doesn't. Driftwood braces can shift if the bank undercuts. I lay there tracing failure points like a mechanic running diagnostics in the dark. Near dawn, I heard Boone whine once by the back door, then settle again. By first light, the storm had eased to a mist, but Black Alder was loud in a way I had learned to respect. Eli was already up, hoodie on, hands wrapped around a mug. "We should check it," he said. "Yeah." We took the trail slow because the ground had gone greasy overnight. Boone splashed ahead and doubled back, tail neutral, no alarm. As we came through the last alder gap, I saw the damage before we reached the bank. The middle section had taken the hit. 3 stones were still seated. 2 had rolled downstream and wedged against a root fan. 1 driftwood brace was gone entirely. The caster lip repair held on our side, but the arc into the current had opened into a jagged break. Eli went very still beside me. "Oh," he said softly. I crouched at the edge, cold water spotting my sleeves, and put my hand on the nearest stone like touch might change what physics had done. It didn't move. Nothing was wrong with the work. The creak had just come harder than the build had anticipated. I wanted to be measured and fatherly and practical. Instead, something in me slipped. I stood too fast, took 2 steps up the bank, and took my cap off like I needed air. "I can't keep doing this," I said, not to Eli exactly, not to anyone. "I patch 1 thing, weather takes 2. I push and push, and it's like—" I stopped because my throat tightened and the next words came rough. "Maybe I should sell it. Maybe I'm dragging you through my nostalgia because I don't know what else to do with grief." Eli wheeled closer until his footrest touched my boot. His voice stayed calm, but it had weight in it. "Dad, look at me." I did. "You're not dragging me," he said. "You asked me if I wanted to come here, and I said yes. You're not failing because water is stronger than plywood and mud. That's not failure, that's weather." He took a breath. "And if we leave someday, we leave. But don't make that call from 10 minutes after a storm." I laughed once, but it broke in the middle. "You're 12. You're not supposed to be this reasonable." "Well, you keep overbuilding ramps, so somebody had to balance the household." That did it. I bent, put my forearm across my eyes, and cried right there on the near bank with rainwater still dripping off alder leaves. Not loud, not dramatic, just the kind of crying that comes when a system runs past capacity and finally shuts down to save itself. Eli put his hand on my sleeve and left it there. Boone leaned against my leg from the other side, damp and solid and patient. In my head, the words came in present tense, blunt as hammer strikes. "I'm tired of turning every sorrow into a project plan. I'm tired of acting like if I choose the right lumber and calculate the right angle, then no one I love will ever be stopped again. I'm tired of pretending guilt is useful because it feels like control. It isn't control. It is just weight. My son is beside me, alive, steady, asking me to stay in this moment instead of arguing with old roads I cannot drive differently. The creek is doing creek things. The sky is doing sky things. I can grieve Mara and still be here. I can fail at noon and still show up at dusk. I can let help exist even if I cannot explain it. We stayed until the cold got into Eli's hands. Back at the house, I peeled wet clothes by the stove, made tomato soup and grilled cheese, and moved through chores with that hollowed-out clarity you get after a hard cry. No heroic decisions, no listing the property, no declarations. Just towels in the dryer, Boone brushed down, Eli's math packet on the table, and one quiet house riding out a grey day. 3 days passed before the creek dropped enough for me to recheck centre flow without arguing with safety. During those days we didn't go down. Rain came in bands, then fog, then clear breaks that never lasted. Eli worked on school, I rebuilt a sticking drawer slide and patched a roof seam, and neither of us said much about the crossing. The wrapped cedar truck stayed on the mudroom shelf, waiting in plain view. On the 4th morning, the storm finally broke clean. The air had that washed brightness that makes fir needles look lacquered, and the peaks above the ridge showed fresh white, where spring had pretended to be summer for a minute and gotten corrected. Eli was at the table early, jittery in that controlled way he got when hope felt risky. "Can we go now?" he asked. "Yeah, let's go." We reached the bank just as first light slid into the meadow, and I stopped so abruptly Eli bumped my heel. The creek was transformed. From our bank to the far side ran a full stone causeway in a gentle S-curve. Each slab broad and seated, gaps packed with gravel wedges, side pressure broken by driftwood braces pinned into natural notches. The line met current with intelligence, not force, and crossed at the one seam where flow ran shallow over bedrock before dropping into deeper green. At the final lip on our side lay a cedar plank, hand-smoothed, set flush against the first stone, so front casters could roll up without catching. Eli whispered, "No way." I walked the edge slowly, boots testing each placement. Nothing rocked, nothing shifted. The plank had been shaved on one end to kiss the trail grade, then anchored with 2 forked sticks hammered deep. I ran my palm over it. Tool marks, yes, but also long passes from a rough hand finishing what tools had started. I took photos from both bankside angles, set my tape measure down for scale, and shot close-ups of brace points and gravel lock. Then I put the phone away. Evidence mattered, but there was a moment moving toward us that was bigger than records. "Ready?" I asked. Eli looked at the crossing, then at me. "Only if you're not white-knuckling the push handles." "I can do calm." "You can do medium calm. Let's start there." "Fair enough." He lined up on the cedar plank, set his hands, and rolled forward. The front casters climbed clean, then the rear wheels met stone with a soft thud and held. I kept one hand near the push bar, barely touching. Boone trotted ahead 2 stones, turned and sat facing us like a guide dog for a pilgrimage. Halfway out, Eli glanced upstream and went still. "Dad." I followed his gaze. 30 yards above us, in amber mist where sun broke through alder leaves, he stood with one hand resting on a cedar trunk. Massive, dark-furred, shoulders wide as a doorway, eyes steady and calm. He didn't advance. He didn't retreat. He watched us cross what he had built. All the restraint I had patched together over the last year gave way at once. Tears came hot and immediate. I didn't hide them. I couldn't have if I tried. I was crying because my son's wheels were moving over stone instead of sinking into mud, because something ancient and silent had seen exactly where we stopped and answered it without asking for anything back, because I had felt alone in my worst season and was suddenly, unmistakably, not alone. Eli reached back and squeezed my wrist. "It's okay, Dad." "I know," I said through a laugh that shook. "That's why I'm crying." We reached the far bank and turned to face upstream. Boone sat between us, relaxed, mouth open in that easy dog smile. The creature remained where he was, still as bark, except for the slow rise and fall of breath. Eli looked at me. Truck? I nodded. My fingers were clumsy as I unwrapped the cedar carving from my jacket pocket, where I'd tucked it before we left. Eli took it with both hands, rolled to the nearest flat stone at the far edge, and set the little truck on top, centered and deliberate. "Thank you," he said, voice clear in the morning air. The creature held our gaze one long beat. Then he lowered his head a fraction, stepped backward once, then again, and let for shadow fold around him. No sound beyond ordinary movement in brush. No demand to be followed. No final display. Just a quiet withdrawal that left the creek, the stones, and the three of us in a widening silence. After a minute, birds resumed along the bank, first one call, then another. Water moved over the causeway with a settled tone, lower and smoother than before. Boone stood, shook once, and sneezed as if to break the spell politely. I took one last photo of the crossing from the far side. Stone line, cedar lip, Eli's wheel tracks clear on damp rock, and deep prints upstream near the trunk where he had stood. Back at the house, I printed them, dated them, and put them in the folder with the earlier measurements. I wrote one line under the newest image and left it at that. Completed after storm, by hands kinder than mine. I left the pen uncapped on the table and stood there with my hand on the photo paper until the ink dried under my thumb. Eli rolled in beside me and looked down at the print with the line I'd written across the bottom. Completed after storm by hands kinder than mine. He read it twice, then tapped the edge of the picture. "You keeping all of it?" "Yeah." "In the tool chest?" I shook my head. "Not there anymore." I pulled an old metal cash box from the pantry shelf, the one Mara used for receipts and birthday cards, and set it on the table. Inside were the creek notebook, printed photos, the tape measure snapshots, and the first page where Eli had written stone spacing in his neat school print. I added the newest photos, then a zip bag with 3 pea gravel pieces I'd pocketed from the brace line, and shut the lid. Eli watched me click it closed. "That feels serious." "It is serious." I rested my palm on the box. Not because I need to prove it to people, because I don't want to lie to myself later and pretend I dreamed it. He nodded, then looked toward the back door. "Can we go back after lunch?" "We can." By Thursday morning, the sky had gone bright blue after 3 days of clean weather, and June's truck came up the drive trailing dust instead of mud. She climbed out with groceries on one hip, took one look at my face, and set the bags down on the hood. "All right," she said. "You look like a man holding a live wire and pretending it's twine." "What happened?" Eli beat me to it. "We need to show you something first." June gave me a narrowed sister look that had solved many bad decisions in my 20s. "Ray?" I picked up 2 grocery bags and headed for the mudroom. "I know how this sounds. Just walk down there with us." We took the lower trail slow. June kept pace beside Eli, one hand near his chair when the ruts tilted. Boone worked shuttle duty between all 3 of us. At the bank, June stopped talking. The full causeway sat in sun and moving water like it had always belonged there. She walked to the first stone, crouched, and pressed both hands to it. Then she stood and looked upstream at the cedar trunk where I'd photographed the prints. 2 of them remained clear in the damp shadow, longer than my forearm. She didn't step into a joke. She didn't jump to denial. She just exhaled and said, "Your dad told me things when I was little. I thought he was telling stories so I'd stop being scared of the woods at night." Eli turned toward her. "What kind of things?" June kept her eyes on the prints. He'd say there were old neighbors in these hills. Not people, not bears, just old neighbors. Said if you respected boundaries and kept your hands kind, you might be helped when you were outmatched. She looked at me then, and her face softened in a way that made me feel 10 years old and seen. I never repeated it because folks laugh, and I got tired of hearing laughter. I felt my throat tighten. He told me versions too. I dismissed all of it. You were 16 and loud. Dismissing things was your hobby. Eli laughed, and the sound broke the heaviness in the best way. June crouched by his wheel and traced the cedar lip with her fingers. Whoever did this understood exactly where a front caster catches, she said quietly. Yeah, I said. Exactly. She looked at me again, that practical judgment still there, but gentler. What are you doing with photos? Keeping them. Dated. Labeled. Good. She stood. Do not put this online. You'll get tourists and drones and men with bad intentions. I won't. I know, she nodded once. I just needed to hear you say it. After lunch, while Eli worked on science at the table, I made 2 calls I'd been avoiding. The first was county permitting. The woman on the line listened while I described a hand-set seasonal stone crossing on private land. No bank excavation, no machinery. She put me on hold long enough for the kettle to whistle, then came back. Mr. Jordan, if you're not redirecting flow or cutting banks, we note it as a temporary low-water access feature. Keep debris clear before storms. If you add fixed structure, call us first. I can do that. She read me the note number. I wrote it on blue painter's tape and stuck it inside the cash box lid. Thread closed, no surprises. The second call was to Bay 3. My foreman answered on the 3rd ring. Ray. Yeah, it's me. How's mountain life? I looked out the kitchen window toward Alder Shadow. Hard, better, both. He was quiet for a beat. That sounds more honest than when you left. I'm not ready for full shifts yet, but I can do 2 days next week. Diagnostics and light work, if that still stands. It stands, he said. You show up steady, we build from there. Thanks, Tom. No hero stuff, he said. Just steady. Steady, I repeated, and meant it. That Saturday, we made our first real run to the old picnic bend. Eli lined up at the cedar plank, pushed, and crossed without me touching the handles. I walked alongside with Boone splashing 1 stone ahead like he had memorized the route. Midway across, Eli stopped and looked upstream out of habit. Empty bank, moving shade, birds in full song. No watcher today, he said. Maybe not. He rolled on. At the far side, we found the little cedar truck still on the stone where he'd left it, darkened by weather, but upright. Eli picked it up, turned it in both hands, then set it back down exactly where it had been. You leaving it? I asked. Yeah. He smiled a little. It belongs to the crossing now. We ate sandwiches on the old flat near the bend, the one from my childhood photo. Boone lay with his chin on Eli's footplate. Water moved over the causeway in a low, even tone that no longer sounded like refusal. Eli peeled an orange and said, Do you still think about the crash every day? I answered before fear could edit me. Yes, but it doesn't run the whole day now. He broke a section in half and handed me one. Mine too. We sat in that truth without trying to cure it. Above us, a jay complained from a fir branch. Downstream, the doe and yearling appeared again, drank, and moved on. No panic, no drama, just shared ground. By the 2nd week of June, I rebuilt the homestead the way I should have started, with Eli at my elbow and a tape measure in his hands. We lowered the pantry shelf another 3 inches. We regraded the woodshed threshold. We replaced my oversteep back ramp with a longer one that took more lumber and less pride. Every change started with the same question. What do you need here? I asked. Eli would test, think, and answer. Another inch left. Less slope. Handle on this side, not that one. It slowed me down in the best way. It made the house ours instead of mine. One evening after chores, I carried a flat crossing stone I'd pulled from a loose edge near the trail and set it beside the porch post where morning light hits first. Not as a trophy. As a reminder, strength can be gentle. Help can come without humiliation. A man can accept both and still keep his hands busy. I opened the cash box that night and did final housekeeping like I was closing a work order with respect. I added the county note number, Tom's return to work schedule, and a single page titled, What We Observed. Birds fell quiet before appearances. Boone stayed calm and often sat facing the same tree line. Doe and yearling continued normal behavior nearby. Fireweed appeared twice by Eli's wheel tracks during early construction. No human tracks on near bank mud panels. Prints found only on far bank after full crossing completed. At the bottom, I wrote, No further signs after completion and none required. Eli watched me write, then asked, You think he was lonely too? I considered that for a while. Maybe, or maybe he just noticed us stuck and did what he could. That's kind of the same thing, Eli said. I smiled. You might be right. Summer settled in, warm and long. We crossed to the picnic bend 3 evenings a week unless weather said otherwise. I went back to Bay 3 on a steady schedule and came home tired in the clean way, with grease on my knuckles and dinner plans instead of dread. June kept bringing apples and commentary. Boone kept supervising every project like an unpaid contractor. The creek rose and fell, but the causeway held through ordinary rain because we maintained it together, clearing drift, resetting small gravel, respecting what had been given. Nobody else ever got a full story from me. A couple of neighbors asked about the stones, and I said, We had help. That was true enough. June never pushed for details beyond what she saw with her own eyes. She gave me one long look once while we watched Eli cross at dusk, then said, Your dad would have called this good manners between worlds. I asked what she meant. She shook her head and smiled. I never got the rest of that sentence from him. Some setups stay unresolved, and that is not the same as unfinished. What changed was not that grief disappeared. Mara was still gone. Some mornings still started heavy. The difference was I stopped treating pain like a problem to defeat and started treating it like weather you prepare for with people you trust. I learned to ask my son before I fixed. I learned that practical and tender can live in the same pair of hands. I learned that being a father was less about removing every edge and more about crossing them together without shame. When I stand on the porch now before dawn, coffee warm in my palms, that flat stone by the post catches first light and throws it back in a dull gold line. Down the hill, water moves over rock with a sound I once heard as barrier and now hear as passage. I still don't have a tidy explanation for who helped us, and I no longer need one to live honestly. I carry the evidence in a metal box, the memory in my body, and a quieter jaw most mornings. The world did not become smaller so I could manage it. It became larger, kinder, and more attentive than my grief allowed me to see, and my son and I built the rest of our life from there.